half an hour. Is it any arrangement that you have 5 minutes for discussion? Do you know anything like that? No, just 12 minutes. Have you an idea how to do it?
For a long time.
Or should I give you a sign maybe?
Yes,
5 minutes only?
when you need. I have 22 slides.
Okay. So that means I'll give you a sign when you have only 5 minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to chair the next session, or the first real session. And although we have heard that Joe has already covered all the details, there are still some more details to be heard. And it's my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. This is not Frédéric Boyer, but Vincent Lepastard from Nantes.
Yes.
And the idea is about electric fish and how you then move that into robots. Sure?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do my presentation on exploration of objects by an underwater robot. Use your quick sense. Yes. Okay. The outline of my presentation is a solution to explore the underwater median and the object in the underwater. This it's a new sensor inspired by electric fish. We explore the morphology of the sensor, like the fish, to explore the object. We have an inspiration of this behavior of passive echolocation of fish, and we are coding a simple behavior for this mission to explorations and to explore a reflex combination of control. The project whose this work is done is an European project. It is a future emergency technology project. This name is ANGELS. The aim of ANGELS is to build a reconfigurable swimming robot. It's able to switch to split in a small swimmer robot and to a rigid module robot. And each robot is able to use the electric sense to navigate and to avoid obstacles, recognize objects, and communicate with the other robots. And we will be able to change the electric field around the robot. We change the emitter of the module. What is the electric sense? The electric fish were co-evolved in South America and in Africa. Here we have an electric fish. This name is elephant fish because you have a trunk. And this fish polarized two regions of his body. The first region is the tail with the organ of discharge, and we have the receiver really close to the head. In the first picture, you see the basal current, where the fish will have no object, and the fish emits electric signal, and he see around it, he knows his body, and he knows the portrait of the electric fields. The arrow is the electric fields, and the color is the potential. In the second picture, when we have an object, where the fish do another emitting signal, and you see that the portrait is different, and he saw the object. How the electric fish recognize this object? He compares the first one, when we have no object, and the second one, when the measure is current on the head. And with this comparison, the fish is able to recognize the shape of the object, the size, the locations, and if it's conductive or insulated. what we do, we build a sensor. This sensor is dual cellular approach. We have the fish, and we have a draw of this fish. We have here the organ of emitter. We have the emitter here, and the receiver on the fish is along this body, and here we have put some receiver electrodes. And the principle is to impose a voltage between the emitter and the receiver, and measure all the current across this receiver. Here we build, we show one of the sensors. It looks like this fish. We have here the emitter, and here we have the head with some receiver, some electrodes. Each electrode is cut in two parts, in left part, in right part, like the fish have a right and left part. Here we have the real sensor. What we solve with what solves the fish with electric sense, we have, he solves, first he recognizes the object, the size, and if it's conductor or insulating. We have do a learning approach to recognize the thank you. Yes. We do a learning approach, but the approach costs a lot of memorize. It's not very strong. For navigation, we use the Kalman filter approach. Here we have an experimentations. Here we have the fish, and here we have an object and the tank. And the Kalman filter reconstructs the corner and the sphere, and when we do the motion, it's able to reconstruct the sense. The Kalman filter done a good results, but we have a big problem when the scene increase the complexity. We have more objects, more agents. It's difficult to build the model. Then, to more simplicity or to avoid this problem, the solution is to use embodiment. What is the embodiment for us? When we show here we have a fish, biologists make some experiments, and here we have the electric sense. When the fish goes forwards to the object, he senses in the axial of his body, and when the object is on the side of the fish, he senses only on the side where we have the object. For your sensor is the same thing. When the object is on the front of the sensor, we perceive before on the head, and when the object is located on the side, we show only on the side. Then the measured current is decomposed on two parts, an axial part along the body and the lateral part on right side and left side. And the axial part and the lateral part tell us if the object is conductive, insulating, or is on the left or on the right. How we exploit this symmetry? We remove the composite basal. Like the fish, we have a current. We measure a current when we have no object. And when the axial part is positive, we have a conductive object. When we have the axial part is negative, we have an insulating object. When the lateral part, the difference between the two electrodes of one ring, we have a conductive object on the left part, or we have an insulating object on the right part. And if the lateral current is equal to 0, we have the object in the front of the sensor. We compose this two parts. Yes. We see on the literature, on biology literature, that some fish follow the electric line. Here we have four electrodes, and we polarize the electrode, and we have the portrait of electric line. And in the experiment, we put some fish in this area, and they go in straight. They follow the straight line. And this is the idea we implement for the navigation. This navigation is very simple. When we remove the composite basin, we apply this control law. We go only on straight line, and for the yaw motions, you apply a proportional to the difference between the lateral currents. This gain is a function of the actual current, because the lateral current say if it's a conductive is on the right, and if it's a positive, it's on the conductive object is on the right, or an insulating object on the left. To disambiguate this problem, we use the actual current in the gate. With this sample law, and with the shoes of the delta X, we're able to seeking a conductive object, seeking an insulating object, seeking all objects, and avoid all objects. After show you some results, represent the electrolucation test bed. Here we have the tank with 1 meter length. Here we have the rapid prototype device. We have the sensor and some object. Here a conductive sphere. Here an ellipsoid, insulating ellipsoid. And here we have the first module of angels with electric sense. Here we have the electrode, the small one, the small part. I show you this behavior is seeking conducting object, and this is the experimental result. Here we have the tank, and we have no conductive object. But the tank is an insulating part, and the most conductive point is on the middle of the tank. Then we go forward, and the sensor turn around in the middle. In the second, we put an insulating wall in the middle, and the sensor reach the most conductive area close to the sensor. Then here we are in the middle. Here we are in the middle on this wall and this wall, and here we are close to the point, the side point of the wall. We put, to do some robustness test, we put some another object, an insulating object. And here we have 3 insulating objects and 1 conducting object. And here we have the initial point of the sensor. You avoid the insulating one. Here is too far than the conductive object to sense him. Then he continues this motion. And here is close to sense this object. It is the last part, is the exploration of objects. Before I show you the simple behavior, like seeking, and here we compose this behavior to explore the object. Here we have the general architecture. Here we have the sensor with the current measurement. Here we have the navigator, I explained, and the locomotor. The behavior is to reach this object, and after to turn around. We use this kind of sensor. We have 2 parts of each ring, and we measure the current. Only this current here is the emitter. The navigator have 3 sub-blocks. The accelerotions, and you make the acceleration. The accelerations is the common part of the measured current of 1 ring. The lateralization is the differential part between the 2 parts of the ring, and we have a memorization block to memorize some kind of current. The exploration strategy. Here is the first part of the exploration strategy is to keep to an object. We have an object who is under interest. We can go to follow the line, the electric line, to skip the other object. The second thing is to flee to avoid this object and to flee the electric influence. And the third law is to follow the boundary. Here you have memorized this current. We change each behavior with one conditions. When the second ring of the sensor, the measurement changes the sign, and here when the actual currents have a minimum. I explain why. The interpretation, here we have the basal current with no object. When we have an oscillating object, we perceive here a negative current. And when the sensor go forward to this object, the oscillating object push the electric line in the second ring, then it changed and it became positive. It's the same thing for the conductive ones, and it became negative. And for the minimum value of delta EX, when we turn to flee the electric influence, when this part is close to, when the head is close to the object, the current is bigger than when we are far. When we turn in the measured current decrease, but when the emitter is close to the object, the current increase. Then we have a minimum when the two parts at equal distance, like equisense distance. And we have I done some experimentation. Here we have exploration of small objects. We have an oscillating object. Here we have the sensor. In first part, it go forward, but it's in short time. And here, when it go forward, here we have the first current, the head current. Here we have the second ring current, and here it was negative, and here it became positive. And when it was here, the sensor changed this behavior. And when here we have the minimum, a minimum of value of EX, it changed, and here I follow the boundary. Here we have the motion path for an ellipsoid. And when we do this experimentation, we show that this is not a circle, but it looks like an ellipsoid. And we say we have something to do where we recognize something, some object in this part. The second experimentation, exploration of a large object. We put a wall here in the middle of the tank. The sensor go forward, and it detects. Sometimes it detects the wall, and it turns to avoid the obstacle. And after he memorized this value, it was here, memorize this value, and it turned around. We do not recognize the wall because here we have a small tank and a big wall in here. Then we don't move close to this wall. We do another experimentation to follow the wall. Here it's the same. The sensor go forward, and after in the first we put a wall in the corner, and we follow the wall. The first behavior, it's in blue, in dot blue, and when the sensor is here, we remove the wall, and with the same law, we don't change, and it follows the real wall of the tank. Conclusions. We have a new solution to explore the object. It requires no model. this control law permits to seeking an object and turn around this object. Its robustness, we have the same law with many experimentations, and he explores the haptic modality of the electric sense. We don't touch, we just follow the straight line. The work in progress is this extension of this control with we combine with a generic model of object, a small object. We know that the small objects are encapsulated by a model of sphere, and the model of sphere is very simple. We extend this for multi-agent extensions with communication to exchange the information. We don't use here the electrical configurations. We put the emitter in the same place. We can move the emitter in the sensor to have more information. And we implement this on JS platform. Thank you for your attention. Here we have an experiment when the sensor go out of a maze. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. We also have enough time for discussion and questions. Any questions? I have one to start with. You showed this I'm shouting loud enough, I think. You had this experiment where you showed the ellipsoid body and the other ellipsoid circle around it, or not the circle, ellipsoid. Does this depend on the starting position, or is it independent of the starting position?
We think that it depends on starting point, yes.
Okay. So you could not use this ellipsoid, for example, as a measure for recognizing the shape of the ellipsoid.
But we have turned around a long time where perhaps you can recognize with a short model of something like that.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, please.
What benefits to the behaviour do you think you get by reconfiguring the electric field around the fish? Say changing the dipole length or something?
I don't.
So what benefits to the behaviour do you think you could get by reconfiguring the electric field around the fish, say changing the dipole length or something?
We think when we change the electric field, we have more information, but we don't know. The fish have not a static electric picture. We have it changes along the time. We have a pulse and we change along the time. We have benefits with here we are only on resistive measurement. We have if we change, we have a capacitive measurement, and if you change this electrical reconfiguration, we have changed the measurement, have more information, but more information for recognition, not for this behavior.
Other questions? If not, that's not the case, then thank you very much again, Vincent.
Thank you.
And I would like to introduce the next speaker. This is Andy Philippides from Sussex University, and it's about navigation. And as during the time he's hooking up his computer, I may say a word for the term navigation. It's used in behavioral biology in a very specific way. The behavioral biologists made a distinction between orientation and navigation, and not all people know that, and this leads to misunderstandings sometimes. So navigation, orientation means that the animal behaves in direct contact with the stimulus. Navigation, it does not have the direct contact to the stimulus, but has to find the food place or whatever without having a direct sensory contact. So that's a distinction. And you will talk about navigation.
I will talk about navigation. So thanks very much, Hulk, for clarifying a point for me, and thanks for the organisers to invite me. So I'm going to talk about how embodiment can simplify the problem of view-based navigation, and specifically navigation in ants. So I'm going to start with my acknowledgements. This work, a large part of this work was done by Bart Baddeley, who's a postdoc with us, who's now finished and off to pastures new. And Paul Graham does a lot of the insect work, along with Antoine Wistrach, who's a postdoc in our lab now, and Ken Cheng from Macquarie University in Australia. So a lot of this work was done with Australian desert ants, and those guys sat in the hot sun in Alice Springs looking at ants while I sat at home. So a lot of acknowledgements to them. And then Phil Husbands and Tom Collett are kind of supervisors, advisors. And then just at the end, I'm going to talk about just some hints of some new work we've been doing. I've just come from Seville, where we've been looking at some Velox ants in a very, very hot field. I was only there for a few days, but Mike Mangan, who's Barbara Webb's postdoc in Edinburgh, has been there for several months looking at ants there. And we had Wolfgang Sturzel, formerly of Bielefeld and now in Munich, and he was doing some mapping of some environments, so that's quite interesting work. And finally, the biggest acknowledgement to this lady here. So she's an Australian desert ant, Mellophorus, and she's very happy because she's carrying a big bit of cookie, which they like very much. So these are what we study, yep, let's get on with the talk. And obviously my funders, EPSLC, BBSLC. So it's been known for many, many years that animals can get back to their home or a place of interest using vision. And this process is generally known as visual homing. And the idea is very simple, that you just return to a place that looks like home. So this is a picture taken from von Frisch's book from a swallow, I think, that was making a nest in... sorry, has anyone got a laser pointer? Sorry. Yeah. So it's made a nest in the eaves of this. So it's made a nest in the eaves of this bike shed, and this is its main nest. And when it's come back, it can't tell. It just looks for a place that looks like this, and so it's made lots of little sub-nests because it can't tell one area from another. So this is the problem of kind of man-made environments. There's lots of places that look the same. But essentially what insects, what animals try and do is they try to get back by remembering what the world looks like from their nest or a place of interest, and then moving to sort of make the world look more like that place. So there are lots of models of this, and they all work reasonably well. And this is the kind of basic idea. So this is some work by Jochen Zeil and colleagues from 2003, 10 years ago now. And he took panoramic images, so the whole field of the world around you, from a cube of positions in natural environment. And then he took an image at the center, and he compared this image to all the other images in a plane across the bottom, and just did one image minus the other and summed the difference, squared the difference. And this is the difference function. It's kind of known as a IDF difference function. And you can see there's a gradient as you go along towards the goal. So essentially, the world gets more different. It's a very simple observation, but it gets more different as you move away from the place that you remember. And the scale over which this works, essentially, it works as long as you can pretty much see everything that you could see from your goal position. You don't need to be able to see your goal position. You need to be able to see the things you could see from your goal position. It's quite an important distinction. It also only works if these images are aligned. So if I'm facing it the same way when I've taken all these images. Oh, sorry, we can't do that. There's another way we can use these images. If the images aren't aligned, we can do another thing. So if I've taken an image from this position here, and then I'm a little bit further away, and I rotate this image through 360 degrees and compare it at each angle of rotation, I'll get a function that's like this. So it now no longer will go down to 0 because I'm not exactly at the image, but I get a minimum when I'm at or very near the direction at which I was facing when I took the first image. So in this sense, this has kind of been called using a view as a kind of visual compass. So we can use this view to recover the orientation of the reference image near the goal. Okay, so what does this mean for ant navigation? And why do we study ant route navigation? Well, this is the environment of the Australian desert ant. It's not a desert, as you might think of a desert. There are lots of these tussocks of grass tussocks, which look very similar to one to another, and various distant objects, trees and such like. So why do we study these things? Well, they're central place foragers, which means that they go out from their nest, find food and bring it back to the colony. All the foragers are female, so all they care about is going out and coming back and giving the food up. Why do we study these particular ones, and why in Seville as well, is because their ecological niches, they come out when it's really hot. And pretty much everything else has died. And they go out and they pick up dead things and bring them back. And this means that they don't use chemical trails because they just evaporate. So it means we can distinguish visual learning from other things. So these guys don't use chemical trails. And they develop idiosyncratic routes along a corridor. So this is a picture adapted from Kohler and Vayner. So this is some trails of a single ant over 10 different runs through these tussocks. So these grey things are the tussocks here. And you get these very idiosyncratic routes from the food to the nest. This is about 20 metres. And it's not going exactly the same way, but it's going along a kind of broad corridor, roughly the same way. So it's got a very nice behaviour. And we know that these routes can be performed independent of path integration. So if you take a nest from the food and put it in the middle of the route, or from the nest and put it in the middle of the route, then in both cases, the ant will recapitulate the route from that starting position. You can put them pretty much anywhere. They also learn these. They can learn these routes in one go, so after one exposure, and so it's very, very quick. And it's independent. So what this also shows is it's independent of the sequence in which the route is experienced. You don't have to. It's not a so procedural thing in that you have to go through all these points before you can do it. You can put them anywhere, and you can take them from here again and put them here, and they'll just recapitulate the route. So essentially, it seems like what these ants are doing in this route navigation is not maybe solving one of the classic tasks we might think of when we think of rat navigation or place cells, which is where am I? Solving the task of where am I? It seems like what they're doing is a simpler task of asking, what do I do in this situation? So this is the perspective we've taken. We'd really like not to be able to care about mapping the world or mapping my place in the world. We'd really like to know just what do I do when I'm in this situation. Okay, so what does the behaviour looks like? So this is this video has been slowed down 10 times. So here the ant comes along. They move very quickly, unsurprisingly, in the heat. And if you view it in real time, it looks like she just goes straight. But when you slow it down, she seems to pause at various points and scans around, sort of virtually turning on the spot, and then heads off. Okay? This is a bit zoomed in. Same behaviour. So there's this kind of sort of saccadic element to the movement. We've got these bursts of forward movement, and then these scanning, and then she moves off. And Paul and David and Tom are doing some very nice work using this scanning as a kind of probe into what the ant is paying attention to. So, given this behaviour, what do we need to know? Well, these ants are very, very successful navigators through very complex environments. But they do it all with very small brains and very low resolution vision. Their vision, for these ants, is about 3 degrees at best. So that's pretty poor vision, quite small brains. So if we want to mimic their strategies, what do we need to know? Well, we need to know, firstly, what information there is in the natural environments for them to navigate with, and secondly, how this information is used. So that's what I'm going to talk about in the remainder of this talk. So what information is sufficient for navigation? So to look at this, what Paul and Ken Cheng did was they found an ant nest close to an air-conditioned building, which is very important. And if I move this here, maybe this will be slightly better. Let a route develop to a feeder. So here we've got nest, feeder. Let this route develop, and then see what happens when you mess about with things. So the thing people ask, well, people often say, well, okay, look, they're just going to head for the house. If they want to do this with vision, they're just going to head for the house. It's a huge, big queue in it. And this is one of the things in why we look at embodiment, is you've got to try and see the problem from the ant's perspective. So if you take a panoramic image from the nest, this is what the world looks like. Okay? So this is a panoramic image from here, I think, or maybe it's even from the nest, and this is the house. Okay? And this isn't even really the full field of view. This is only up to, I know, 40 degrees above the horizon. And the house occupies a very, very small part of this. So I think it's really important. I mean, it's much more important for maybe insects and mammals to really get an understanding of what they're seeing, what their sensory environment is like. Yeah, it gives you a much better understanding of what the task is that they have to solve. So, what Paul did was, as I said, he took a panoramic view, from the feeder, and then he recreated this very crudely with some plastic, black plastic, and so that the view from the nest in the midst of this arena, which was at some distance from the feeder, roughly matches the panoramic view from the feeder. And when he tested ants in the artificial skyline, happily they were happy to use this and go in the direction they should have gone. So their habitual direction was this way, and this is the direction in the skyline. And when he rotated the skyline, and notice he had to rotate it to an angle where this thing covered this tree, so it would look quite the same. They went again in the direction that the skyline dictated rather than their polarization compass. So what we can say then is that the skyline seems to be sufficient for navigation, for these things to navigate, for the ants to navigate. So what we wanted to do is quantify what the information was in these environments. So we took a series of panoramic images through a set of routes. This is an open route. These images are every 3 meters, I think. And you can see things are moving fairly smoothly. We also took some more cluttered routes. This is the most cluttered. And by cluttered, it just had more grass tussocks in it. And you can see there is a lot more visual clutter in the world. There are some stable objects and some visual clutter. We then extracted, we either took the whole image or the skyline, very crude extraction of the skyline in either the open routes or cluttered routes. And if you look at the skylines along the route, you can see why there is sufficient information for homing with these. So this is the open route, and you can see, so this is the outline of a tree, which kind of moves smoothly across the retina as you go along the route. And here's another tree here. And even in the cluttered route, there are these periods where you get what seem like stable landmarks in the field of view. So the skylines do seem to contain sufficient information for visual homing, even in these very cluttered environments. So we know kind of what information might be there, and we know the information is there. So how can this information be used? Well, there are kind of two ways that this information can be used. This is a kind of classic snapshot idea. So I have my agent pointing this way, and it remembers what the world looks like from this position. And then later, as I said, it just moves to minimize the difference between aligned views. And this allows you to home to a position from all directions around it. So if I put my agent here, it will be able to home into its nest position. So this is its nest position. If I put it here or here, from every direction it will home into the nest. But I need these views to be aligned. There's an alternative way we can use it, which has a visual compass. And in this model, again, you remember the view from your nest, from your goal, and then you rotate until the world looks most similar to your memory. And then this recalls the heading that when that view was stored. So in this model, you get a slightly different behavior. So you can start off at various different, any arbitrary angle, but the heading that you're going to recall from this goal view is this one. So it's going to recall this direction. So I should get a minimum, roughly, when I rotate and I'm facing in this direction again. Okay? So there's two different models, really. So both of these models work in regions near the goal. So we then looked at whether how this information played out in these different environments, from open to cluttered. So we tested a series of 30-meter routes. And this is the classic snapshot model, either using the whole image or just the skyline. And there's a kind of decent minimum over 10 or so, 15 meters. And then as it gets more cluttered, the minimum gets smaller. And so the distance over which you can navigate gets a bit shorter, but still you're getting something. Even for the cluttered route, on average we were getting about 3 or 4 meters. So that's if I'm doing the snapshot thing, if I'm aligned. If I'm using the thing as a visual compass, we got very similar results. So we were able, again, to home, or the ant would be able to home in this situation, even in a cluttered route, over about 4 or 5 meters. So you can use both of these things in regions near the goal. However, for the ant needs to go over a long region. So how are we going to get round this? The ant needs to go about 30 meters. So if we want to extend the range of this model, how do we do it? So the obvious answer is to chain a series of these snapshots together and just home from one to the other in a sequence. So here, each snapshot defines a discrete place, and I'm going to home from any point to here, and then I'm going to switch to this one. I'm going to home to here, and to here, and to here, and to here. Alternatively, you could use each snapshot to define a visual compass. And then each snapshot then is going to define the heading that I was at when I remembered that view. Okay? So it's my movement direction when I remembered that view. So instead of these blobs here, sorry, this is a very bad cartoon, I'm remembering the direction that I was facing when I took that view. And here, what you'll see is you'd expect routes that kind of looked parallel to this. Whereas in this situation, what you might expect is that when you got close to these positions of these remembered views, you'd get kind of a pinch point. You'd be going into that position. So there may be a hint behaviourally about what we can look for to disambiguate these possibilities. For us, if you think about using the views to define directions to discrete places, there is a more serious issue. If you actually try and implement this, which we have tried to do, it gets quite complicated, and various other people have found this too. Because the views define directions to discrete places, nearby locations will recall different directions. So if I'm in between two snapshots, one of them is going to be pointing me back this way, and the other is going to be pointing in the opposite direction. This means that when you're near a snapshot, you get a lot of conflicting information. And essentially what you need to know if you're going to do this is some idea of place recognition. You need to know which waypoint you're homing to, and particularly which waypoints you've gone past already. And this is surprisingly tricky. So you need some idea of either sequence, and you need some idea of place recognition to make this work robustly. Now, the thing is, if you've got place recognition, you may as well do something a bit more map-like, maybe. So maybe this is a bit of overkill. The other issue with this is that obviously the more waypoints you've got, kind of the more robust you are, but the more waypoints you have increases this idea of this interference between the things. So you've got to also add in another mechanism to specify when and what to learn. And finally, you need to be aligned as you're doing this. So the original snapshot model was based on bees and wasps and flying insects. Now that's fine for bees and wasps can stay aligned and then move in any different direction because they're flying. For ants and things, it's a lot more difficult because they're walking. They're kind of constrained to move, to face in the direction that they're moving. Now, if instead you use views to define the heading you were at when you were at that place, then across a route, the directions are roughly consistent. And particularly from nearby locations, the directions are consistent. So the directions at nearby locations don't record different directions, they're consistent, so we can sensibly pole across multiple waypoints, which allows us to increase robustness. And the sequence of the waypoints is unimportant. I just use whatever seems the most familiar to me now. This allows me to learn continuously or semi-continuously, or learn a lot more waypoints as I go. And also, I don't need to be aligned. So what we wanted to do was test out this model in a series of environments. So this is the idea. So this is how the embodiment might serve to aid navigation. So first of all, I traverse the route once, and presumably this is done through path integration or something like that. So I've gone through the route once, and now I need to use the information that I gained in that to then, for all the subsequent trips that I do. And I utilize the constraints of embodiment. Now, for the ant, it's constrained to move in the direction in which he's facing. She is facing, sorry. She's constrained to move in the direction in which she's facing. So the viewing direction, the things that I see, do specify, the viewing direction is coupled to the movement. So the views that I experience during training are implicitly in the correct directions. And this means that the views specify the orientation I should take when I'm in that position again, and so the views specify an action. So we're going directly from a view to an action. And so essentially just learning the training views as they appear to me implies learning the home directions and the whole route. So if I want to follow the route, I simply scan the world and choose the most familiar direction. How am I doing for time? Is anyone?
8 minutes.
8 minutes, okay. So this is the world we use. So this is a simulated world. It's kind of a simulation of the Tussock world. So this is a top-down view. This will be my training route. And this is what the ant sees as we go through the training route. Simulated ant. So you can see that the world is quite tricky to learn, and the heading is varying as we're moving along the route. So the route's generated randomly with sort of random path integration with random noise, and then so this is the information, all the information we give to our agent. We just pass it through a network once, and then we have to recapitulate the route. And this is roughly the algorithm. We use an Infamax network. So we use the views to train a neural network to perform familiarity discrimination using the Infamax training rule. And essentially, what we want to tell from the network is how likely is it that I have seen this view before? That's all I want to know. Is this view familiar or not, and how familiar is it? And there are multiple ways we can do it. The Infamax network's really nice because we only present the views to the network once, and then we throw them away. And then, as I'm returning, once I've just passed these, passed these views through the network, I then simply, at each point, I rotate on the spot. Each view is passed into the network, and I just choose the most familiar view and head in that direction, and then the process repeats. Okay? So, does it work? Well, I guess I wouldn't be here if it didn't work. Yes, it does work. It works very well. So these are the red routes are the training routes, and then there are multiple black routes underneath. And it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see that the paths, they don't follow. We've got noise on the world, so they don't follow the paths exactly, and they tend to follow their own kind of idiosyncratic routes as they go. And so this is heading to the nest here. These are just some images along the route. However, you may have noticed a flaw in the plan. So this is great for route navigation, and so the routes are generally parallel to the training route. However, if you go past the nest, you're just going to keep on going, because the last memory you had was pointing in this direction, and so you're just going to keep going and just carry on until you're lost. So we also looked at using around the nest. We used to look in multiple views, each oriented at the nest, to draw an ant to it. So this was inspired by the learning walks of the oxymyrmex ant, and so a paper by Rüdiger Wehner, who showed that these ants have a spiral. As they're leaving the nest for the first time, they spiral outwards, and at certain points they turn and they fixate the nest directly. And this has got to be controlled by path integration, because this is a proper desert. It's very featureless. And so we looked at what happens if you have 4 memories and average the direction you get from them. So 4 memories all pointed at the nest. And if you use this, you can then use this approach to draw the ant back into the nest. So what we did in this case, we said, okay, well, what if we add in a learning walk to the beginning of the training route? So we don't need another mechanism. We've got this training route, and we add in a learning walk in which a lot of the views are oriented towards the nest. And then as the ant comes back, it's following its route here. And when it gets into this area, some of these views become more familiar, and it kind of starts to recapitulate these routes here. And in this example, we've actually covered the nest, and we get what looks like sort of place search here. So we can get place search and route navigation through the same mechanism. We can also let the ant have more experience of the route, and this is our most difficult route. And this is kind of at the limit. As you get things more cluttered, it gets more difficult. And if you give it more training routes, then it gets better with experience, which is nice. It can also learn multiple paths to a goal. So here we've got 3 paths to the goal, and you just pass each path through the network. And there's no disambiguation. It doesn't know whether it's on path 1, 2, or 3. It just does what it did when it was in either of those places. So there's a sense in which there aren't multiple routes here. There's just one route, but it's just sort of spread out in space. And we've also implemented this in the real-ish world, and we're currently looking at doing it outdoors. That's me done pretty much. So to summarise, what we've shown, I think, with this work is the visual information required to guide a route can be learnt holistically in one network using views to specify familiar directions. And this is really the key concept, that each view doesn't specify a place, it specifies a direction or the action you were taking when at that place. And at the very beginning, I showed you that the ants do this scanning behaviour. They observe behaviour in the natural environment, which is this sort of scan at certain points, would seem to subserve this sort of route navigation model. And it results in a very simple model of navigation. And I think the general overall point is that if we want to mimic the elegance and simplicity of animals' strategies, we've got to study both the situated and embodied system. And I just want to finish with, I'll just leave some videos up. So what we were doing in Seville, we really want to find out if this is actually what the ants are doing. So the model works, but is it what the ants are doing? And so this is the field in Seville. We've got the ants corralled in this area, this road here. So we know their visual experience. And the idea is to map the whole of their visual experience. One of the reasons we study ants is they're probably the most complex animal that we can follow for the whole of their foraging life without getting into too much trouble. So we can track these ants from their very first exit from the nest We can follow them every time they leave the nest and recreate exactly what they've been seeing. Admittedly, it's a relatively short life for these particular ones, because we then get rid of them after they've done their tests and things. But they've got a couple of days. But we can see all that they've seen throughout their whole life, which is a real powerful tool. So this is the setup so this is Mike Mangan from Edinburgh, and he's got a differential GPS on this quite heavy arm, and also a camera pointed downwards, and there's some laser pointers here, so he's moving over the ant. So he's both recording its position with quite high accuracy, and also videoing its behaviour, so we can see its scanning movements. And then later, he follows the ant when they test it, and then we'll be able to see. And then the final part of the puzzle is what Wolfgang is doing, and he's got a very impressive laser scanner. So he scans the whole environment and can recreate with, we hope, very high fidelity, a 3D model of the world. We can then virtually place the ant and see what the what was the ant seeing at any position in that world. So we're quite excited by this. These guys did a lot of work in a lot of hot sun, so very many beers. But this is kind of where we're going. Okay. So thanks very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much for this impressive talk. We have not too much time, but 2 or 3 questions.
In which bit?
In your outdoor behavior?
No.
Behavioral screens, you didn't?
No. No.
Now imagine if you would add to your model a cellar action or dorsal rim area action that senses the polarization pattern.
Yep.
What would you imagine you should improve, or?
I don't know how happy they'd be navigating without the ocelli painted over. Would they? Well, I mean, that's the thing. So we're really trying to get their natural behaviour here, and we know the integration. But you know, if you put visual information and path integration in opposition, visual information will win out. But it's quite hard to do that. It looks like these two mechanisms are working in parallel, and I think the ocelli are very much used for that. Some other work they were doing, some other kind of quick experiments we did here, is these particular ants seem to really just do some phototaxis. In the absence of all else, if we paint over their eyes, they seem to just kind of move to the sun, just head to the sun's position. Not entirely sure why that is, but so if they're kind of completely lost, and zero vector ants, they'll do that. So, yeah, I'm not sure, but I think, I would guess it's kind of independent. In the experiment that Paul did in Australia, so there the visual information was in opposition to the compass information, and they prioritised visual information in that instance. So I think they'd probably do that. But then they get, as soon as the world starts to look a bit different, then they'll go back to path integration or something.
Okay, I saw 2 more questions. There was one upstairs, and then Joe. Could you make a brief question?
Yeah, I didn't get what probes the animal to create a new snapshot and thus to create a new waypoint. Is it after moving a fixed distance, or is it when they detect some salient object?
Okay, so that essentially, I didn't say that because that is one of the problems with the classic snapshot model. You have to decide when to learn. I mean, in the models that we did when we've tried to implement it, it's when there's a significant change. So you've got this kind of threshold. You're monitoring what's going on, and then, okay, I'll take a new one now. It's the same problem as when you're recapitulating the routes. When have I passed one? As when I've got similar enough. So in our model, we just learn every, 4 centimetres. We just take we're taking a new image. So it's kind of semi-continuous. And that's, we wanted to get away from this idea that there's discrete points of learning. But, you know, it's controversial. Tom Collett doesn't quite believe it. So.
Okay, thank you. Last question by Joe.
Have you fooled around with the serial order of snapshots?
In which one? In the current one, it doesn't matter at all. No. The original Infomax paper, they say actually if you, it actually makes it better if you present things in random order. Because essentially what the Infomax thing is doing is roughly pulling out independent components from the images. So I think if you decorrelate the input, yeah, so it would work. With the multiple routes, what I didn't say, we trained on one, tested, then trained on the next, trained on the next. But you would imagine if you kept going for long enough, you might overwrite some stuff in the beginning, but probably quite a long time.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think there were many questions, but we have to move that for the breaks. So next speaker, thanks a lot again, Andy. Our next speaker is David Sipsop from Berkeley University. And it's now a completely different field. It's moving the arm. As you are hooking up your machine, maybe I'll make a quick comment for the organization. After this session, there will be a poster presentation, and I'm not sure whether those people that gave their poster not only give the poster outside, but also present it here. I'm not sure whether that's a question to the organizers. If so, the poster people should know that they give a presentation here briefly.
Sorry.
Did anyone who has a poster have a spotlight prepared? Because we weren't expecting to do them. But you did? Yeah. Anybody else? This is for today's session. So 1, 2, 3. Anybody else? Okay. So I think we can have 3 5-minute spotlights. So be ready to do them very quickly when we come to the end. And okay. And I think for tomorrow's session, we'll try and fit in some highlights. Spotlights, the people that have full papers in the proceedings rather than extended abstracts. If there's a lot of people keen to do a spotlight, then we'll prioritize the people that have the full papers. Thanks.
Okay, we are ready to hear the talk Distributed Control on Complex Arm Movements.
For the last 30 years, I've been training artificial neural networks to do computations that the brain does. And this has yielded some interesting results, which I'm not going to go over now. But recently it's become clear that neurons are too low-level a subunit to use efficiently for modeling higher-level cognitive functions. This idea has occurred to a large number of people, and many higher-level subunits of various types have been suggested. They're very clever, but none of them appeal to me for being natural, biologically plausible subunits. So in thinking about this problem of what could be a higher-level subunit, it occurred to me that evolution might have stumbled on a solution to this problem. The nervous system has evolved a great deal in a relatively short time, and the rate of evolution has increased. Let's take a little look at this issue. This is Amphioxus, a relative of what is almost certainly a pre-vertebrate organism. And it has a teeny-weeny brain, and in 600 million years, a mere 600 million years, I say a mere because 3 billion years went into the, I also need a laser pointer. I have one, but, what? Oh, right in front of me. All right. Now we'll have to figure out how it works. Oh, is that it? Okay. So 3 billion years have gone to make this, and then in 600 million years we went from Amphioxus brain to a monkey brain. Now, this is a doubling about every 30 million years. But in perhaps 6 million years, the monkey brain has gone to a human brain, and it's nearly four times bigger than this. And this change, this huge explosion, means that it's doubling of the order of every 3 million years, 10 times faster. And not only is it getting bigger, but we can argue it's getting a lot smarter. And so huge numbers of neurons are being added at a very high rate. And it's hard to imagine that some huge numbers of mutations are working in some kludgy fashion to have this take place. So the idea is that there must be tricks that evolution has stumbled onto that make this work well. And what I'm going to look at is, and suggest, is one of those tricks which may indicate what a good subunit would be. Okay. So this is an actual event. This is the brain this is Amphioxus. It's bilaterally symmetrical, but it does not have paired neural organs. It has a single frontal eye. This eye, although very, very primitive with only 16 photoreceptors, actually is clearly a progenitor of the vertebrate eye. But going to vertebrates, okay, we went from one brain to two brains. Every vertebrate has paired organs, paired receptive, or actually it has two brains. This is a side view, but if we open it from the top, there are two brains. So the brain has actually doubled. And of course, just doubling the brain is genetically a pretty easy thing to do, right? I mean, we don't have to do much, just make some kind of stupid mistake during development, and we have two. So the unit here of the basic unit of making the brain bigger is actually a brain. There's a problem, however, and it's a very deep problem. And that's conflict resolution. Here, since it's only a frontal eye, we don't have that problem. But here, it's obvious that if one brain wants to go this way and the other brain wants to go this way, there's only a single agent. There's only one animal. So there must be some way to resolve this conflict. And I'm going to get back to that, because that's the key thing. Now, let's see what might be a hypothetical use of this kind of brain doubling. So we might imagine that instead of making side-by-side doubles, we could make in situ doubles, all right? That's pretty trivial, too. During development, when we were going to make one neuron, we just make two, okay? It doesn't require a lot of genetic hacking to do that. Again, a stupid mistake. Now we have a brain which just had two neurons wherever there was one before, but they're all hooked up the same way, and they do exactly the same thing, so the animal can behave perfectly well. It does go through whatever it did to survive. But we now have an extra copy which we can use for experimentation, either genetically or by some kind of learning technique. The extra copy could, in principle, be now changed, let's say genetically, without keeping a good copy. So we're not, every time we make a genetic change, we're not destroying something, we're just adding something. It may be good, it may be bad, it may be neutral, but at least it has a high chance of not killing off the organism entirely. So this is an experimental palette on which behavior could now be improved. But it has another advantage. It's a whole brain. So it has all the parts necessary for behavior. It has an input, it has whatever internal computations there are, and it has an output. As long as the conflict problem can be solved, this new behavior and the old behavior can work together. Okay. So that's hypothetical. But now, whoops. Oh, so anyway, so I'm going to guess that this is something that evolution stumbled on, and I'm going to call this basic, this sort of basic single brain here, a bright. Okay, it's a mixture of brains and bytes. Bytes are the units of information and so forth. But it's a nice name. I picked it because I couldn't stand another name that ended in ON. Neuron, whatever. Proton. I had to be something else. Okay. So, but now if this is the basic unit, remember initially it was a very, very tiny, simple brain, but other things are happening to all the brains, okay? So the simple unit might get more and more complicated, but it would still be a unit brain. Now, after this initial thing, this initial doubling, we don't have to double all the time. We can just make another, basic brain and add it to the existing brain. All right, so now, the reason I've drawn it this way is to sort of make you feel that it could fit in the head. So now, the red one might be the old one, or the blue one might be the old one, the red one the new one. So now we have the whole brain, and we've just added another basic unit of brain. And again, since we have the old copy, the whole thing is going to work right, but it now has a palette for new development. So, and so this kind of thinking led me to believe that a subunit for building complex brains are simply simple brains. If you have one brain, you can make many brains and put them all together and make them a little different in some way, and slowly you might imagine that you now get a very big brain, every part of which has all the components necessary to be a brain, but they all have different behaviors and the different smarts. And some magical way they all work together, and conflict resolution is solved. All right, so that's the biological justification that led me to think of brights as simple brains that can be used to build complicated brains. Now, the nice thing about neural networks, artificial neural networks, is that they not only have this biological basis of being real units, but they also are very good for computation. So the question is, are these things any good for computation? And I've tried them on a number of problems. I'm just going to show you how we use them, how I've used them to solve one problem in arm movements. So here's a problem. We have an arm, and we have some obstacles and a target. And we want to reach for the target and avoid the obstacles. So we're now going to use the bright method. Imagine that you had a little brain with a visual system and all that stuff right at the tip of your finger, okay? It could see the target, and because it has a visual system, and it can also move the arm because it has a motor system. Now, moving the arm is a little tricky because this is three-dimensional space and this is a high space. We'll talk about that later. But at least in principle, this could move the arm. You can think of yourself as standing there with a joystick, and your job is simply to point the joystick towards a target, and the joystick has some smarts and it knows how to move the arm. Okay? So that's a simple task. But it could run into the obstacle. So let's put a, so that's, let's now imagine that all over the arm we have brights. Okay? Each one is a little brain. And these guys, okay, these guys look at obstacles. And any given one looks out and sees an obstacle, and its basic behavioral paradigm is exactly the same as this, except when it sees an obstacle, it moves away from it instead of towards it. Okay? So now we have all these guys moving away from obstacles. We're going to make some slight differences. This guy wants to always move with essentially the same velocity or the same strength towards the target, but these guys want to move away only from nearby obstacles. So we build something in that allows them to have a big effect on arm movement if they're close to an obstacle, and virtually. Oh, I got my own water actually. Thank you. And so that the effect of the obstacle falls off with distance. But these are the virtual locations of these brights. They clearly have to be in the brain, right? Well, so each of these is a little brain with some minimal capabilities, but clearly defined. And they're living in the brain. So you might say, well, that's a fanciful idea. There couldn't be any data for that. Strangely, there's a lot of data for this, and most of it is quite old. So long ago, in the premotor area, there were a kind of cells called visual tactile neurons. Each visual tactile neuron, which sits in the premotor area, far away from the visual system, has the following properties. If you touch any place in its tactile receptive field, the cell will fire. However, if you move around in the space near its tactile receptive field, it will also fire. Now, those fields are limited in their extent. They haven't actually been plotted out in great detail, but they're clearly limited to the region around that. And what's more, there are neurons, they're essentially all over the body, not only on the hand, but on the face and any place else, presumably. Okay? And what's more, they're in the coordinate system of the body part. So this one, for instance, would have its visual, obviously its tactile receptive fields are going to move with the hand, but its visual receptive field also moves with the hand. Okay? So they're all body-based, and they can be body-based anywhere. That is exactly what you would expect in the computational part of that bright. That is, if you were recording a neuron in a brain that did what this bright did, you would have exactly a visual tactile cell. Now notice, it's got to have a motor system, and in fact, it's in the premotor area. It's also got to have visual information, because if you turn out the lights or shut your eyes, okay, the visual part won't work. So the eyes are not over here; they're over here. Good. So that's just what you would want. And whoops, that's not what I want. Where's the other one? There it is. Okay. Let me just try again. It's jumping. Oh, no, that's fine. I confused myself. All right. In addition to which, there are cells in the parietal area. There's a parietal reach area. And they have the property that they're hand-based. That is, they're on the hand. That is, their virtual location is on the hand, and their firing rate reports the distance to the target. So this doesn't say brights exist, but all the neural features for that exist. Okay, now let's turn our attention to the following. Again, all very nice. Can you use this in some way to actually move a hand around obstacles? And that's a pretty difficult problem. Let me just say parenthetically that it's also a problem which I and my colleague Elizabeth Torres have analyzed many people work on this problem, but we've done work on the method I'm going to talk about for the past decade or so. But let's look at this problem now. Again, what I'm going to do is give you the envelope of the problem and its solution, and the nitty-gritty details are both in my written paper and in the literature. But let's consider this problem. It's massively ill-posed because there are an infinite number of paths the arm can follow. That's the good news and the bad news. It's the bad news because it makes it very hard. You have to be able to select one. It's the good news. If you want to go around obstacles, you've got to have a lot of paths that you could go on. The other source of ill-posedness is the fact that there are many degrees of freedom in the arm, typically far more than in the space where the hand moves. Okay, so this is in this particular arm, and the one I'm going to use in the demonstration has seven joint angles. So now what we have to do is solve the problem of, given the location of the target and the starting set of joint angles, we have to try and figure out how to move the arm over here. Okay. Well, it's a ill-posed problem. It's got to be solved by optimization, optimal control. The type of optimal control I'm going to show you here is a simplified form which describes the complete geometry solution to the problem, but not the actual physics of torques and stuff. And I don't want to go into how we go from the geometry to the torques, but there is a way. So optimization requires that you have a single positive scalar, which you can either maximize or minimize in order to get everything to work. That scalar has to be a function of all the variables in the problem. So so we're going to take as a scalar the distance between here and here. Why is that good to minimize? Well, as a hand moves from here to here, okay, if we minimize the distance between the hand and the object, we're going to get to the object. So the distance is, we have a perfectly good function for the distance, but we have to relate it to the joint angles because they're also variables in this problem. But there is a function. Given all these joint angles, we can compute the position of the hand. Notice the ill-posedness says if we're given the hand, we can't pick a particular set of joint angles. So this function f maps from the set of joint angles to the set of positions. Now, using this function, we can make the distance a function of the joint angles. All right? So now we have our distance, which is our positive scalar variable, and we have it as a function of all the variables in the problem. Okay? So now we're going to optimize it. We're going to use gradient descent. That's because that's the only optimization. Having worked for 30 years with backpropagation, that's the only optimization technique I know. So, or know well. So So we compute the gradient. The gradient of r, okay, is given after a little bit of algebra and the use of the chain rule, is given by the Jacobian of this function, okay, which is a 7 by 3 dimensional matrix, times the gradient of the distance function, which is a 3-component vector. We multiply them together and we get a 7-component vector, which is the gradient of the distance. Okay? Gradient descent says to reduce the distance, move in the opposite direction of the gradient. It's a 7-dimensional vector, and it tells how to change these joint angles. So the algorithm for moving the hand to the target is simply to go, which is a delta Q, that is how on each step of movement, if we did it discretely, we'd simply move in the direction of the gradient times some constant. Okay, so, and this works. It actually is very interesting. The math is wonderful. There's a lot of differential geometry you can do and confuse everybody. But basically this works, and Dr. Torres and I have studied this system extensively. However, what about the avoiders? Well, we could, for any given avoider, we can use the same principle, all right? It's simply that instead of using the hand position, we use the position of that avoiding bright, object avoiding bright, and instead of using the goal, we use an object position. Actually, we have to use the position of all the objects, okay? Because the bright doesn't, there's no a priori way of knowing which obstacle I'm avoiding. However, since the effect of obstacles that are far away is minimal, it goes to 0, essentially we're only moving away from obstacles that are near. Okay? So the basic equation is the same. However, we have a lot of them. Okay? So we have, for each of those brights, the change in Q for that particular bright is equal to the gradient for that bright times some function. This is a Gaussian that falls off with distance. Okay? And this notion of object avoidance is seen in robotics, where you have a potential field and you follow it and so forth. Now we come to the issue, the key issue of conflict resolution. And here's where the math of this whole thing is beautiful. This is a gradient and this is a gradient of functions of Q. Well, the gradient is a linear operator. So the gradient of the sum of all of these is simply the sum of the individual gradients. So we can say, whoops, yes. We can say that we can use this. The change in joint angle at each step of movement is just equal to the sum of all the there should be a delta here, actually, I hope, yeah. Of all the delta Q's for the brights and the delta Q for the hand, all right? So this should be this here. So we just sum them up. This, however, is a hypothesis. Okay, it's mathematically correct, but it doesn't guarantee that a moving hand is going to miss the objects. This thing might do anything, but it's at least a good idea. So let's look. We have to simulate it. So in order to simulate this, I wrote a simulation program which involves that, and also a nice MATLAB GUI in which we have an arm and some obstacles, and we can run the simulation in which we take the delta q's for little steps, okay, to stay on the gradient. We use small steps, and we can move an arm. And this GUI allows us to do various things. We can move the targets around, we can move the obstacles around, and we can set the starting position for the arm, and we can record that sort of stuff. Now, I'm showing you this for two reasons. One is it shows you how I find out, study the issues. But this GUI is available to you, and one MATLAB file contains all the code. And that's an important thing. It's an important aesthetic for simulation that if I simulate something, you ought to know exactly what I did, not approximately, okay? So this gives you the exact code, 100% of the code used for this simulation. Therefore, any details which I've left out in this talk, and there have been quite a few because little details, and the exact way I did this is available to you. So you can repeat the experiments, and you can see the code, and you can use it. It's available online with my presentation. Okay, so now let's see what happens. Whoop, what happened? I went backwards. Okay, now here we go. Now I have to use, excuse me. Okay. So here is a movie. Here is a movie. Okay, so there's the hand moving without any obstacles, and there it is with an obstacle. All right, it's just one obstacle. It runs up to the obstacle and then it went around it. Okay, so that shows that at least it works in a simple case. Now we're going to see a number of cases in which things get more complicated. How am I doing time-wise? I'm over? Well, give me another 3 or 4 minutes here. I got a couple of nice movies. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now, whoops, that's the wrong, no, that's right. That's the wrong thing, okay? Haste makes waste. Okay, let's try this. There we go. So it can do that, and it can do that, and it can do that one. This is a nice one, because, all right, this is not planned or anything. This is just what the simulation does. All right, these are movies of a simulation. The movies run roughly the same speed as a simulation, a little faster. Now this is important because this obstacle is not in the path of the hand, okay? It has to be avoided by the elbow as it goes by. That's important because it's very hard to think about any pre-planning algorithm that's going to worry about an elbow, okay? It's very different from having an agent that's just one agent running around, a little point agent running around in a world. You're attached to an arm. Okay, now that's all very nice. Give me just a couple of more minutes here. I have 30 minutes exactly. Whoops. Now I got to go back to this one. Now we're going to see this one. However, there's a problem. Here's a problem. Here's the problem. The problem is that the two terms can cancel. Okay, so the movement forward and the avoider movement can get trapped, as they do in this case. All right? That doesn't happen in real life. In real life, we would not head for an obstacle that interferes with a path to the goal that we can't get through. We would reach around it. It's as if, okay, we set up a we set up an imaginary target, go towards that, and then go towards the goal. And I did that. Let me just continue this thing and see if we can see that. The important thing here is rushing is hard. Okay. So I did that by searching for an intermediate target, and you'll see that's how it goes. So what's important here, the important take-home lesson here is this. It's not how I find the intermediate target or anything else. It's the fact that you can solve the local minima problem by going to a higher level, namely the visual search and so forth, without hacking the lower algorithm at all. And that's important from both an evolutionary and a programming thing. Now, I just have one more thing that's neat. I'm just going to do it very fast. In all the cases you saw, both the goal and the obstacles were not moving. But this algorithm works fine if they're both moving, as they are, for instance, when you scratch an itch. So if I have an itch over here, and I want to scratch it, I have to move my arm up, so both arms move, and if the arms don't hit each other, then the obstacles are moving, the targets are moving, and everything. And so you can set that up using exactly the same algorithm, and you can get a really, it's very simple. You can get two arms moving in a coordinate fashion. So, and now here's the, it's not working. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's pretty obvious what's happening. This is a very hard problem, okay, if you try to program this, okay? If you tried to program that thing, it's a very hard problem. So that's it. I guess
Thank you very much. One question? Yeah. For sure.
Thank you very much. Can you tell me about such a kind of number of distributed unit you can compute those things? Second is, how do you know such a sensing those things? And third is...
well, one question, Tom. They're all good questions. The total number of units, I think it's around 100 with one arm and 200 with both arms.
How do they know this kind of... how do
they know where they...
yes.
Yes. Okay. So the answer is this. On every obstacle or on the arm, one picks many points, okay? Well, on the arm, you pick many points. On each obstacle, you in principle pick many points, and each bright looks at every single one of the points. In other words, it scans the entire visual field, okay? And builds its vector for motion, the avoider brights, on the basis of adding all of those together. However, most of them are zero. Okay, so that's that. Now what's the next?
Third question is, in this kind of here, how can you evaluate the systems are very efficient in terms of exploring such a null space of redundant manipulator?
Okay, so
efficiency.
I'm not.
How do you evaluate this kind of your methodology is
okay?
efficient?
So there's a visual problem.
Yeah,
here.
in terms of the null space.
I do not solve the visual problem. Okay, I assume the visual system will solve the visual problem. Okay, and build an internal model. Okay, and these brights do not actually see the world. They see an internal model built by a visual system. But I have not put the visual system in here. I know where everything is. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, he had a third question.
Move your question to the coffee break. Next speaker now. Still looking up his machine. Okay. So this is, next talk is about incremental learning in a 14 degree of freedom simulated iCube robot. So number of degrees of freedom increase. Model infant reach, grasp development, and the speaker is Piero Savastano from Rome University, co-authored with Stefano Nolfi. Just a second. Time is not yet running.
Hello? Hello? Okay, good morning. I'm Piero Savastano and I'm working with Stefano Nolfi, is it there? In the Laboratory of Autonomous Robotics and Artificial Life in Rome. We are from the Italian National Research Council. We present a model on how the reaching and grasping behaviors are developed in children from 0 to 12 months of age. It's implemented in a simulation with a humanoid robot. We pose ourselves two questions. One is, how do reaching and grasping emerge in early infancy? And in the case we understand that, can we build a model that displays a similar process? And second, and this is more on the engineering side, can we use this principle in designing robotic controllers? This is the experimental scenario. We have a simulated humanoid robot, the ICAP. There is also physical simulations. We have a ball in the peripersonal space attached to a pendulum. And this is the same setting you can find in experimental papers from the 90s. These are experiments done on real babies. We have a neural network controller that takes input from the cameras, from the tactile sensors on the hand, and computes how the movements of the robot must be done. So this is the main schema of our study. We impose a neural maturation, and we observe how this maturation affects behavior. There is an evolutionary algorithm managing the connection weights of the network, and we use as an evaluation criterion seeing and touching the ball at the same time. So we want the robot to experience the world multimodally. We have 3 phases. Also, those phases are taken from the literature, the experimental literature. And at the beginning of each of the 3 phases, we operate a modification on the neural network, and we call these modifications maturational constraints. This is the first phase. It's the pre-reaching phase. In this age, children are not yet able to show goal-directed movement. They are more exploring their environment. And we have a reactive architecture, so the proprioceptors and the exteroceptive information is going directly to the motor system. We simulated also a low visual acuity because the visual system is not yet mature. And we have a set of reflexes implemented by hand coding some of the weights. We have a grasping reflex, so whenever the ball touches the hand of the robot, the hand closes. And we have an orienting response, so whenever the ball is in the visual field, the robot turns the head toward the object. This is what happens at the end of the first training phase. So we have explorative movements, basically. Is not even looking at the ball. We have this form of motor bubbling, so exploration, and we have the lock of the elbow. These two things are observed also in real children, and they emerge because, one, there is a rather simple computational structure, and two, because by locking some of the degrees of freedom, you can reduce the dimensionality of your sensory motor space, and by moving at random, you can explore it. So without talking about inverse kinematics and other classical robotics concepts. This is the same concept from another perspective. We replicated this kind of plot that you can find on experimental papers. We put in relation the distance between the hand and the shoulder that is constant through time, so there is no contraction or extension of the arm. And this line is the distance between the hand and the ball. So, and this one is varying in time. So basically, the first difference between how baby reach objects in respect to adults is that an adult will first point the object and then extend the arm. A baby will first extend the arm and then search for something. This is the second phase. In this case, we added hidden neurons to the network to simulate the maturation of the corticospinal tract, and we improved the visual acuity. And in this case, there is also a stereotypied movement, but in this case, we have better reaches and grasps. And also, an interesting thing is that the elbow is unlocked. He is moving the elbow. To go more into detail about the distribution in space of the reaches and grasps. So here you have the grasps, and here you have the reaches, and the three different phases. I will introduce the last one in a while, if I don't smash down the microphone. So each dot in these plots is a successful reach and a successful grasp in space, x, y, z. So while in the pre-reaching phase, you have random movements, and still the robot can do many reaches in space. In the gross reaching phase, there are less reaches, and they are only in the central part of the prepersonal space. So there is a regression. But we do think we interpret this as an adaptive regression, because one, the grasps are increasing, and two, because in the final phase, both reaches and grasps are at their maximum. So we think that also in this case, due to limited resources, the agent is choosing to reduce some of its skills to improve the other ones. It's not a problem. I take it. No, thank you. Okay. So there is a temporary regression that is adaptive. As a final phase, we introduced a visual sensor to encode the offset in the visual field between the hand and the object, because we know from the experimental literature that this feature is present only from 8 months on. And this is what happens at the end of the training phase. In this case, we have reaches and grasps in all positions. So the behavior is still fuzzy, it's not really optimal, but I will point you to the fact that this is a simulation of a 1-year-old baby. So we already saw two non-linearities in this developmental process. One, the lock and unlock of the degrees of freedom. Two, was the adaptive regressions of one skill in order to develop a new one. In this case, we have another non-linearity. We tested the robots from the 3 phases in some sensorial deprivation condition. So nothing impaired. We take away tactile information, we take away visual information, and we take away every exteroceptive information. The interesting thing is that while if you take away tactile information, you still have the relation between the three phases conserved. Here, if you take away visual information, the pattern is switched. So in this case, black, fine. The fine reaching robot is worse in performance than the gross reaching one. And we do believe that also in this case, the robot is exploiting so much the new visual sensor that is temporarily forgetting how to use tactile information to improve performance. And so we expect a new switching with further development. This is the final set of results. We run a set of non-incremental control conditions in which basically we took the model as I described before, and we changed some of the features to better study their effect. And this led us to distinguish between two sets of maturational constraints, the adaptive ones and the non-adaptive ones. This is an example of adaptive constraint. So if you remember, we only used the internal neurons in the second phase. And we found that if the robot is provided with internal neurons since the beginning, the performance on the long run is lower. So there is an actual advantage in not having more neural resources in the first developmental stages. And so this is called an adaptive constraint because it's a limitation giving an advantage. This is another example about an actual constraint. We had the visual offset sensors only in the third phase. If we had those sensors in the first stage, we have a better developmental process. So in this case, we can talk about a real limitation on development. Discussion, we implemented this model, this robotic model. It's plausible, and we are happy about it because it extends the relative literature in many ways. We have a longer time span of development, 1 year of development. We also have a complex sensory motor system, and we found many experimentally documented behaviors. We show that the doff freezing and motor bubbling, they do not need to be hand-coded in the models because they emerge as simple yet efficient strategy to explore the sensory motor space. We also saw that development sometimes requires regressions. So it's not the case that you have skills built upon each other. It's better to imagine development as skills growing, then lowering down in order to develop new skills, and then take them both up together again. We introduce also in this multidisciplinary field an old, from the 80s, distinction between adaptive and non-adaptive constraints, because we think that it is useful in engineering, because you only want to know which are the adaptive ones. And we are also trying on the long run to establish not only the performance effect of these constraints, but also to understand how they qualitatively affect behaviors. Because sometimes you can design robotic controllers that really match human behavior. Sometimes they are more efficient, so quality is different. So it's not only about efficiency, it's also about the quality of behaviors. And I'm done. Thank you.
So my question is a little bit towards understanding whether you differentiate between development, that development has also an aspect of, learning,
Yes.
by really finding the right target of the neuron, something like that, and learning, changing in synapses. So do you distinguish between those, or
Yes.
is this it's not necessary distinction?
Okay, we have ongoing synaptic modification, and we can call that learning. And we can call development the set of maturations that occur from genetic instructions. I know it is not that correct to separate that, because also Hebbian learning depends on molecules that are produced by the genetic code. So everything is really beautifully interconnected, but in this case, as it is a simulation, we need to distinguish. But anyway, development is it's macro learning, something like that.
Thank you very much. May I ask you this kind of simple question? Okay, you mentioned about such a vision.
Vision.
Okay, also the tactile. Okay.
Yes.
Those things. Is it so? Can you explain those things in terms of such a using a degree of freedom? What you mentioned, freezing is a kind of a degree of your motion. I thought maybe if they have a kind of a vision system in this training stage, they may reduce such a kind of freeze and reduce a kind of redundant motion. If they don't have a vision, only tactile, they might have a more kind of using arm, searching or exploring those things. I thought so. But I didn't see such a kind of result in your presentation. Such I'm curious. Can you explain in terms of such a kind of redundancy, freezing motion in terms of sensing?
I don't know if I understood the sense. I'll try to reply.
See, vision, do they need a more kind of exploration? I don't think so. They know. So freeze, reduce minimum number of kind of degree of freedom. My assumption, okay? If you need only tactile with a vision, they need more exploration using many conditions.
Yes.
That's why I thought so. But you didn't say anything about it.
We run also, yes, thank you. We run also control conditions in which the visual system is mature since the beginning. And anyway, if you give low resources to the robot, it makes this bubbling and freezing, because really it is most effective to reduce your dimensionality, the dimensionality of your sensory motor space, and then moving to find something, rather than exploring everything. So first you learn the basics of your sensory motor space, then while the sensing systems develops, you can unlock the degrees of freedom and do a deeper search.
Thank you.
You mean here? Yeah, we also run simulation with high visual acuity from the beginning, and we obtain the same. I can show you the results. Yeah, pre-H, the visual system is mature from the beginning, and this difference between these two is not significant. So even if you can see, it's better to start by exploring and then selecting strategies. Yeah, you can look at this in a selectionist, really fine in a selectionist philosophical framework.
Yeah, so concerning the stiffening, is that the development that they can't really move it at that point in time? And babies do that, right? But
yeah, babies do that, and they do that by activating both muscles.
So they could do different, but they're not doing it because they optimize their learning. Is that your message?
Yes, yes, yes. And this is not only about the elbow. In real babies, you find those kind of mechanisms also on the level of the shoulder. And also, when people learn sports, for example, learning skiing, there are experimental proofs that they tend to freeze their muscles because they don't know what to do. And then when they get confidence, they start to move everything. And there is also an innate side on this. So you have both these. This is a learned strategy. And there is also a genetic program on the degrees of freedom. For example, babies cannot move singular fingers before a certain age. So in that case, we can say it's an innate phenomena. It's a maturation. In this case, it's really a choice.
If this is not the case, then thanks again, Piero. And this at the same time is the end of the discussion, but of the first session and the discussion, but not yet the time for lunch. We have short poster presentations now, and as far I'm told, there are 3 posters that will be briefly presented. Everybody has 5 minutes time to present his poster, and this is one, I know, who is, and it's yours and you 3. So you can, you are both together? No, 3, okay, so random order, Thierry is first. Pardon? Say again.
Yeah, so in total 4.
A total 4.
My director is joining.
Yeah, okay, so 4. Yeah, no problem. So we have 4 posters. Will you give him that? Or?
He doesn't want it.
He doesn't want it, okay. Maybe I keep mine.
You can take it, of course.
It's so wonderful going first and having it all in spotlight.
The very first, sometimes the computer says.
Hello. So the poster I will present is about ant navigation, but in a very complementary way, as presented by Andrew Philippides. So here we will talk about more path integration and learning of food places and retrieving them. So it's based on the data obtained on this ant, Cataglyphis bicolor. So it's ant that is living in the desert in Tunisia without very few landmarks. So it needs to rely on path integration. So why studying this? Because also collective behavior is very interesting for swarm robotics. And, but of course, we need individual skills to be able to take advantage of collective synergies. So here is a sample of this ant behavior. And this is an experiment where you have an ant that leaves the nest searching for food. And when it finds the food, then you have the experimenter that relocate the ants. And the ants wants to go back to the nest. And we can see that the path integration is well done. And the ants drives toward the expected nest position and finally execute a search behavior. Of course, ants are also relying on vision and as we've seen with Andrew, and they can learn many routes and combine together these two controls. So how they do this, how they can learn several places and also find shortcuts between places, it has been shown for ants. So is there a cognitive map in such a small brain? So here we don't see, but in the ant brain, there's 250,000 neurons. So it's really small relatively to, for example, a human brain. And our hypothesis is that there's no cognitive map into that brain, and so it should work differently. And to test this hypothesis, we propose this model called Navinet. So it's a decentralized controller that rely on path integration and that can learn vector of different food places and also mix with search procedure. And so it can search, learn, and retrieve food places, find unknown shortcuts without any cognitive map, and also combined easily with route navigation as presented by Andrew. So thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to meet you at my poster.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, so we'll do this all. There are another 3 posters, not 2, as I have learned in the meantime.
Hello, good morning. I'm Eric Schinellato from Imperial College London. I'm going to present a work done on the robotic setup of the Robotic Intelligence Lab of Jaume I University in Castellón with the collaboration of Marco Antonelli and Professor Angel de Povil. So this work is on saccadic adaptation. What is saccadic adaptation? It's a phenomenon that emerges during a certain experimental paradigm in psychophysical studies. Subjects are required to start from a fixation point and saccade toward a given target. What happens is that while the saccade is performed, so the gaze moves now to the new cross position, the target is displaced during the saccade so that there is no visual feedback of that. The subject gets to the final position of the saccade and perceives a residual error now because he thought it would be fixating the actual target point. If we repeat this procedure many times, gradually the subjects will learn to saccade not to the original target point, but to the deceptive point. So the question is, can we reproduce this with a robot? We took a robot, we took a screen, and we instructed the robot to gaze at the targets and see if we could induce in the humanoid robot the same phenomena observed in humans. And I will tell you in the poster what happened. You can guess that we obtain some results, otherwise there wouldn't be much to present. And what I will discuss in the poster is the model on which the robotic behavior is based. I will compare the results obtained with humans with that of the robot and the simulation. And if you're interested, we can discuss about how to improve the communication between robotics and neuroscience with this sort of setups. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Akio Ishiguro from Tohoku University, Japan. And today I'll be briefly explaining, giving you an introduction of the following two poster presentation. And as you know, animals exhibit a surprisingly adaptive behavior and unstructured environment. So the question is, what are the principles? What are the mechanisms? So in order to investigate these mechanisms, so we have so far particularly focused on this concept that is the autonomous decentralized control mechanism. So let me show you some our robotic case studies. And this robot, this one, is called is a snake-like robot, consists of many identical body segments, and into which we have implemented the decentralized control. In fact, this robot exhibits a very nice fault-tolerant behavior and adaptability according to the frictional condition of the ground. And however, the adaptability was not good enough. Let me show you an example. Here, now this robot is entering to an upslope environment, and however, he cannot exhibit a good behavior, and you see there down, 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 and let's see what will happen. Wow. So actually this robot can self-organize the phase relationship between body segments, but so as you can see that the adaptability is not good enough. So we implemented to another additionally self-organizing ability for muscle tonus, so the changing the joint stiffness. So as you can see that the robot, this robot can now cope with this kind of environment. However, this is still not good enough. So in order to enhance the adaptability, let's have a look at this movie video clip. So that we, in this environment, we put a snake on a very slippery environment, and this snake pushed their body against a scaffold and produce effective propulsion force. And this is really cool. Right now, in my lab, there is a real snake, and he's really so cute. So anyhow, so in this our studies, we also consider enriching sensory feedback mechanism by exploiting viscoelastic property in body and also scaffold-based locomotion. So in order to effectively consider this kind of scaffold-based locomotion, we take earthworm and snakes, peristaltic movement and lateral undulation locomotion, and drive a decentralized control. So let me briefly show you some example. And yes. So as you can see that the right-hand side, I show this video clip show how our proposed decentralized control mechanism works. So as you can see that the snakes, here, let me show you a snapshot, and you can see that our new decentralized control mechanism produce a very efficient, nice scaffold-based locomotion. And we also show a scaffold-based peristatic locomotion in our poster site. So if you are interested, please come and see our poster. Thank you.
And last poster, please.
All right, that's the last talk before the lunch. I hope you're not already dreaming of your Spanish food or whatever you want to have. Talk is about my PhD work and is also called RoboBee. It's not the Harvard RoboBee. We're interested particularly in the communication system and the waggle dance that also Joe showed. So just to remind you what it looks like. I don't have a poster, by the way, so this is exactly what you can get from me, or you can ask me, but like image-wise or video-wise, this is what you should focus on now. So the brighter rectangle marks the position of the dancer bee. The other one is a follower bee. We call her follower bee. She's trying to decode the message. So what bees do is and that's amazing for an insect, an insect that size, or for a brain that size. They communicate essentially polar coordinates, and that's unique in the insect world, and it's pretty rare in the rest of the animal kingdom. So we know that for 60, almost 70 years. But we don't know, and that's why we are building a robot. We don't know how those follower bees, the not so bright box there, use their sensory information to obtain knowledge about where to go. And well, this is another slide. So what we did is we built a robot, and in that sense, biomimetics for us is not building a fancy new like robotic system. We rather want to use existing tools and conventional robotics to learn about the biology and then stop. All right. So of course we can feed back information to robotic systems, but that's not our primary focus. So okay, that's our robot. We have a bee-sized plastic thing and a rod and cameras, and it's moved with a plotter. So I can describe that later. I guess what at least I would be very interested in is the results. Oh, that's the vision system. I can show you that later. So, and since I don't have a poster, I can just show you the results on the poster. I can just show them on the screen here. Our project particularly is cool because we can use a radar system which we use to track bees in the field. So plan is we dance with a robot and customize or alter the parameters in the dance to learn about the effectiveness of those parameters, because we want to learn about what follower bees use for information. And then once the follower bees fall out, we can track them in the field. And this is a bee here. Yeah. And so that's the plan. And so from starting the project to actually having obtained some results, you know, we spent like 4 or 4.5 years, which I don't really like to show you here. But that's what came out. That's the robotic system here. That's follow bee, and the videos slowed down like factor 4 or 5 or so, so we can you know, compare it to what you saw in 2 slides before. So we see here that, and that's the first recording ever in human and bee history, that bees try to understand what a robot is trying to say. And of course, we because that bee is marked with a number tag, we could put those transponders on her back and then track her flights. And I think the video was showing bee neon green 62. That's our naming convention. And she followed 31 waggle runs and was trained the previous day to a feeder. That's top view on the field. That's the hive. That's the feeder she has been trained to. She had no protocol, no appearance on this side, and we danced to that. And she flew there, but then she flew back to the feeder she knew to check if there's something. There was nothing in the field, just green flat land. And some bees did some really strange and, well, I think cool stuff. That, for example, was pointed to a virtual feeder that never had any sugar water, and she kind of drifted to a feeder that she had been to the previous day. What that kind of, thanks, reminds me on those ant trails of Andrew, right? Where she was, the one bee was kind of drifting into another path. I don't know. I mean, we have to evaluate those, or analyze those data. Another bee, first, like a summary. So we have a system that we can use to talk to the bees. There's still some things to improve, as always. Well, we are almost there that we can answer those questions that haven't been answered for 60 or 70 years. Okay, some acknowledgements. That's Kirk Vischer in Riverside in California that helped with the experiments. I like that photo a lot. So okay, lunchtime, I guess. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you very much. We had 4 posters, one of which was no poster. You saw it. Now it's time for lunch. Or do you need some organizational comments?
As mentioned, lunch is for you to go and wander in Paseo de Gracia, find your best food, and come back here at 3 o'clock. Don't forget to show the badge at the entrance of the building. So, enjoy your lunch.